I never thought that after 18 years of work, my ending would begin with a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. But sometimes things fall apart not because of big mistakes, but because a newcomer looks at your salary number and says you are too expensive. That morning, Chicago was covered in a thin layer of snow, the sky gray like a blank sheet waiting to be written on. I arrived earlier than usual, planning to prepare for our weekly meeting about the security system update. I assumed, as always, that Ethan Hale, the new Chief Technology Officer of Aurora Living Group, would once again suggest speeding things up or cutting costs. He was young, confident, Harvard MBA, his words clipped and precise like the cells of a spreadsheet. I never believed he truly understood what we had built here. The intercom rang. The secretary's voice came through, small and hesitant. "Rachel, Ethan wants to see you in the conference room on the 14th floor. Urgent." I was surprised, but not alarmed. I grabbed my notebook, something I had carried since the days when the company was just 8 people working in a damp basement. The moment the door opened, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy. Inside were Ethan, Diane from HR, and a man in a black suit I had never seen before, probably a financial advisor. 3 people, 3 pairs of eyes, all on me. Ethan stood up and nodded. "Have a seat, Rachel." I sat down. My heartbeat was steady, but something in my mind slipped, like a crack forming on thin ice. Ethan opened the file in front of him, voice even and emotionless. "Aurora is entering a full restructuring phase. The board has determined that the operational cost of the current tech division is too high. In fact, we could hire 3 junior engineers for the cost of your salary." He looked up and gave a polite smile. "Nothing personal, Rachel, just cost reduction." The words fell like a cold blade. I looked at him, into the eyes of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, yet still pretended it was business. For a moment, I thought about the nights I stayed until 3 in the morning, the weekends I spent fixing errors while the city slept. The first 8 years, I barely took a day off. I had built Aurora's entire tech foundation from 2 old servers and a borrowed router. I had watched it grow from a basement to dozens of smart buildings across Chicago. And now, with 3 sentences, all of it was reduced to 2 words: too expensive. Diane slid a cream envelope across the table. "The severance package is generous, Rachel. 2 months' salary and all unused vacation days." I set the envelope down and asked quietly, "Is that all you wanted to say to me?" Ethan blinked. "Unless you have any requests or concerns." I shook my head. "No. Everything's clear." They waited. Maybe they expected tears, anger, or a threat of a lawsuit, but I just stood, shook each of their hands. Ethan's hand was cold as steel, stiff and lifeless. When I walked out, I saw Diane exhale in relief, like she had just finished a task she did not want to do. My office was on the 12th floor, facing Lake Michigan. I stood there for a while, watching the glass buildings fade under the dull winter light, then began to pack. On my desk were hand-drawn system sketches, photos of the engineering team from our first building launch, and a cracked coffee mug. I put them all into a cardboard box. 18 years, enough to fill 1 box, but not enough for them to keep me 1 more day. As I walked down the hallway, a few colleagues avoided eye contact. One tried to smile, but his lips trembled. I understood. In a company cutting staff, silence is survival. I did not blame anyone. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in and looked at my reflection. Gray strands in my hair, deep circles under my eyes from too many sleepless nights. I did not look unemployed, just like someone who had believed too long. Outside, the snow was falling thickly. I set the box on the passenger seat and started the car. The radio played a headline. "Tech companies continue to lay off senior employees to adapt to AI and automation trends." I turned it off. The car slid through the snow, the streetlights streaking across the windshield like fading memories. I did not cry. I was not angry. Just empty, as if most of my life had been erased by a few lines in an Excel file. Before merging onto the highway, I stopped and glanced in the rearview mirror. The Aurora building stood far behind me, blurred by snow. I whispered softly, my voice low as the wind. "They think they lost an engineer, but they just lost the soul of their company." I pressed the gas and drove away. Deep down, I knew this was not the end. When people cut what they do not understand, the world will eventually teach them the real cost of cheapness. I looked out at the lake, the lights shimmering like broken memories. 18 years of devotion, then one day called too expensive. How ironic. People only realize someone's worth after they have lost them. Have you ever been underestimated just because others could not see your full potential? Tell me where you are listening from, maybe during a quiet night or after a long day at work. And if you enjoy smart revenge stories, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss what happens next. Trust me, this is only the beginning. I could not sleep that night. The wind from Lake Michigan whistled through the cracks in the windows, tapping a steady rhythm against the glass. In the silence of the house, I sat in my small study, the cardboard box of my belongings still sitting beside the desk. I opened it and pulled things out one by one. A cracked coffee mug, an old photograph, a printed network map of Aurora from more than 15 years ago. Each piece felt like a fragment of memory, and I let my mind drift back to the beginning. I started at Aurora back when it was still called Horizon Living. I was 29 that year, having just left a software company in Seattle after a failed project. A friend introduced me to Harold Bay, the founder of Horizon, a hard-edged businessman with vision and an uncommon way of seeing people. He said, "We're about to open our first residential complex, and we need someone to build an operating system for the entire building, compact, affordable, and automated." I remember laughing. "So you're looking for both a miracle and an engineer in one person." He laughed too. "If you can deliver half of that, I'll call it a miracle." Back then, Horizon had only 8 employees working out of a rented office with peeling paint and wiring. So weak the lights flickered every time we powered the servers. I sat at an old wooden desk with 2 computers and a cheap router, writing the first lines of code for our property management software in C#. I named the system Pulse because I wanted it to function like the heartbeat of the building. In those early years, I practically lived in the office. When the first building went online, I personally checked every sensor, every door controller, every stream of data feeding back to the main hub. When something broke, I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. We expanded gradually, 2 buildings, then 5, then 10. Everything grew alongside the system I had built, and eventually, Horizon changed its name to Aurora Living Group. When Harold retired, his son Justin sold the company to an investment fund. That was when everything changed. People like me became the old guard, while the new hires, young, ambitious, fluent in buzzwords, talked about strategy, cost optimization, and short term profit. Still, I believed what I did mattered. I kept the system running smoothly so thousands of residents could turn on lights, unlock doors, and pay rent with a single tap. I had asked the company many times to invest in technical documentation and training for younger engineers to understand the system's architecture. I said in a meeting that year, "If I'm the only one who knows the full layout, the company is at risk. We need documentation. We need to share knowledge." The board just laughed. "Documentation takes time. We need results first." I looked at them, people who had never stayed up all night to bring servers back online, and I knew they would never understand. I still remember the night of the Montel, massive blackout in our 11th year. A storm hit the city, and part of Aurora's system went offline. I stayed in the office 40 straight hours without sleep to restore every database. When it was over, Harold, still the CEO at the time, said only one thing: "Thank you, Rachel. You just saved the company. I never forgot that." But gratitude doesn't last forever. Now, sitting in the small room, the yellow lamplight spilling across old papers, it all felt like another life. Daniel, my husband, walked in holding 2 cups of hot tea. He set one on the desk, looked at me quietly for a moment, then asked, "Do you regret it?" I shook my head. "No. I just wish I had left sooner." He sat down across from me, voice low. "They need you. You know that." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But they don't realize that the cost of cutting isn't saving, it's losing control." Daniel nodded without replying. We sat in silence. I looked out the window. Snow was falling gently over the lake, the distant city lights reflecting off it in pale streaks. I took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through my throat. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I only knew one thing. Every system I've ever built follows the same rule. When someone cuts out what they don't understand, sooner or later, that system fights back. I whispered to myself, barely above a breath. They think they've solved the problem. But really, they've just triggered a much bigger one. Daniel looked at me, slightly puzzled. I smiled. You'll see. In 10 days, Aurora will start to regret it. 10 days later, my prediction started to come true. That morning, as I was making coffee, my phone rang. It was Alan, the young engineer I had hired 10 years ago, the one who always called me his mentor. I saw his name flash on the screen, but let it ring until it went to voicemail. A message followed right after. Rachel, the system's down. The doors in several buildings are locked shut. Residents are trapped inside, and the media is already covering it. Ethan's panicking. They're trying to reboot the servers. I set my cup down. It happened sooner than I expected. I turned on the TV. On the local news, the headline ran across the screen. A technology failure at Aurora's smart housing complexes has trapped hundreds of residents inside their apartments. The live feed showed firefighters breaking the glass doors at Aurora Heights, people in winter coats huddling in the snow behind them. A woman told the reporter, "They called this smart technology. Now I can't even open my front door." I watched in silence, a mix of sadness and chill running through me. Not because they deserved it, but because I knew all of it could have been prevented by one simple thing: understanding what they were using. The phone rang again. This time it was Diane. Her voice trembled slightly. "Rachel, I know you're not with us anymore, but Ethan wants to talk to you. The system's having a bit of a technical issue." "A bit?" I asked. "Well, maybe worse than we thought. The security gates, temperature control, and payment system, they're all malfunctioning." I replied slowly, "I don't work for Aurora anymore, Diane. I know. But if you could help, we're willing to pay for your consultation." I hung up. By afternoon, the snow was falling harder. I stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at the street buried under white, feeling something strange, a mix of pity and detachment. 8 years ago, I had warned them not to let the system depend on a single person. They called it a luxury concern. Now they were living in the consequences of their own thrift. By the second day, the national media had picked up the story. Aurora Living, smart technology icon or ticking time bomb. Morning shows brought in experts to discuss the risks of single-person dependency in system management. They mentioned a veteran engineer who left the company before the collapse. No name given, but I knew who they meant. Inside Aurora's internal network, rumors exploded. Alan texted me again. "Rachel, Ethan's blaming you. He says you hid parts of the source code. They're claiming you built the system to be closed off so no one else could access it." I sat up straight. He really said that. It's in the internal email. Alan sent me a screenshot. Ethan's words were clear. "We're dealing with the consequences of an overly complex legacy system designed under a knowledge monopoly structure." I laughed. A dry, short laugh. When people don't understand something, it's easier to blame someone else than to admit their own ignorance. I had told Ethan once, back when he first arrived, "Don't call a system outdated just because you don't understand it." He'd smirked. "You're just defending your old ways." Now those old ways had locked 40 buildings across the city. That night, I received 3 more calls, 2 from former colleagues, one from an unknown number, probably Ethan. I didn't answer. Instead, I went down to the lake and sat on the old wooden bench. The air sliced against my skin, the water gray and still, only the sound of snow falling. I remembered another storm years ago, when Aurora's power grid collapsed and nearly all data was lost. I stayed alone for 40 hours, surviving on cold coffee and stale cookies, until I restored every line of code. When Harold, the original founder, walked in, he said only one thing: "Thank you, Rachel." No one else could have done it. I never forgot those words, but his successors never understood them. Now they were the ones staying up all night, not to save the system, but to find someone to blame. On the third night, Diane sent another email. This time her tone was different. "Rachel, I know you're angry, but things are bad. The payment network is down. Thousands of residents can't pay their rent. Legal is calling it a critical operational risk. Ethan wants to offer you a private consulting contract. The fee is open for discussion." I stopped reading there. It wasn't that I didn't feel tempted, Part of me wanted to return, not to help, but to show them just how much they still needed me. But another part, colder and sharper, reminded me I owed them nothing. I deleted the email, shut down the laptop, and stepped outside. The wind sliced through my hair and collar. Across the lake, the city lights still glowed, bright and oblivious. But I knew, on that side, a technological empire was cracking by the hour. I whispered to myself, a quiet prediction carried by the wind. This is only the beginning. When cheap replaces right, the bill always comes due. 2 weeks after leaving Aurora, I began to realize that silence can be the strongest form of resistance. While the news and social media were still flooded with analyses of the Aurora disaster, I slowed down, trying to piece my life back together. Every morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop, browsed a few job listings, then closed it again. It wasn't fear of unemployment. I just wasn't ready to start over somewhere else. After 18 years, the habit of waking early, thinking about systems, about my team, still ran in me like a fixed line of code. That afternoon, just after the snow stopped, I received an email with an unfamiliar subject line. Informal conversation from Eleanor Reyes. I had to read the name twice. Eleanor Reyes, founder and CEO of Lynx Innovations, the company gaining attention for its home automation breakthroughs. I'd met her once, 4 years earlier, at a tech conference. She was the kind of person everyone noticed. Low voice, upright posture, eyes that truly listened. The email had only 3 lines. Hello, Rachel. I've heard a lot about what you built at Aurora. I don't believe everything the press says. If you have time, I'd love to invite you for coffee. Not for business, just a talk between 2 engineers who understand the value of sustainability. I read it again and again. Part of me was skeptical. In this industry, nothing is ever just a talk. But there was something in her tone that made me want to reply. I typed one simple sentence. Tomorrow, 10 in the morning, Verve Coffee on Lakeview Street. Does that work? The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe was small and warm, filled with the smell of freshly roasted beans. I chose a table by the window. When Eleanor walked in, she spotted me instantly and smiled. You look exactly the same as the last time I saw you, maybe just calmer. I smiled back. Maybe because I've just learned an expensive lesson about who gets to decide my worth. Eleanor studied me for a moment, then nodded. I read the reports. They said you made the system too complex so no one could replace you. I don't believe that. Someone like you wouldn't do that, I answered slowly. I built exactly what they needed, nothing more, nothing less. The problem was, they never really understood what they owned. She stayed quiet for a moment, then set her cup down. I'm building a new system at Lynx, the biggest project we've ever done. And I don't want to repeat Aurora's mistakes. I want something that can last, that doesn't depend on one person, that can't collapse because of one foolish decision. I want you to be part of it. I looked at her. What exactly are you offering? Chief Systems Architect. You'll have full authority over system architecture, your own engineering team, and a dedicated documentation unit, the one Aurora never gave you. She paused, then added, 25% higher salary than what you earned before. I'm not buying your skills. I'm investing in your philosophy. I went silent. That line hit something deep inside me, something I had never said out loud. I had never just written code. I built things with a soul, systems that could live, learn, and run on their own if treated right. You don't have to decide now, Eleanor said softly. But I believe people once called too expensive are often just people who did things too right. I smiled faintly. Maybe you're right. We talked for nearly an hour, not about salary or contracts, but about people and how technology should serve them, not replace them. When she left, I watched her go, and for the first time in weeks, the heaviness inside me lifted. For once, I didn't feel discarded. That evening, I opened my email and saw a new message from Alan. Rachel, the system's still failing. They're desperate. Ethan sent another message asking for your help. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new email, typed 3 words in the recipient field, Eleanor Reyes. I wrote, I've made my decision. I'm in. The next day, Eleanor replied, Welcome to Lynx. Together, we'll build something built to last. I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching the snow melt outside the window. Across the city, Aurora was still drowning in chaos. I didn't feel joy or revenge, just clarity. I was about to start again, but this time, with people who understood that true value doesn't lie in cost, but in doing things right from the start. What I didn't know then was that Aurora's next call would come much sooner than I thought. 3 weeks after I officially joined Lynx Innovations, Aurora began to collapse for real. It happened faster than anyone could have imagined. That morning, I was in my new office, a small but warm space filled with natural light and green plants, when my phone started ringing nonstop. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept coming back, pausing only long enough to start again. Finally, I looked at the screen. Diane, HR, Aurora. I sat still for a few seconds before picking up. Rachel, Diane's voice trembled. I know you don't want anything to do with Aurora anymore, but things are getting worse fast. The payment gateways are down, and the central control system has crashed completely. No one can access resident data. The entire board is in emergency session. I stayed quiet, listening to her unsteady breathing on the other end. Ethan told me to call you, she continued. He said, he's willing to negotiate any consulting terms you want. Just help us bring the system back. I looked out the window. Snow was falling lightly, morning light spreading across the city like a thin mist. I spoke slowly. I already told you. I don't work for Aurora anymore. Please, Rachel. Diane's voice softened. You know that system better than anyone. If we can't restore it today, we could face class action lawsuits from hundreds of residents. The leadership team is desperate. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone calm. Maybe they should have thought about that when they called me too expensive. Then I hung up. Less than an hour later, my inbox exploded with 3 new messages. One from Alan. Rachel, it's bad. The main server is overwriting data. The backup can't be restored. Ethan's blaming the tech team, but everyone knows we can't do anything without the original code. One from Ethan. Rachel, I know you're angry, but we can work this out. I'll pay $300 an hour. Can you start at 4 p.m.? And one from the current CEO, Justin Bay, who inherited the company from his father. Rachel, if you help us through this crisis, I'll make sure your position is reinstated with a proper bonus. I read all 3, then deleted them. By late afternoon, as I was leaving the Lynx office, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Ethan's voice came through, hoarse, drained, stripped of its usual confidence. Rachel, I'm sorry for how we treated you. I was just following orders from the board, but now, we really need you. The system's nearly paralyzed. Every building's failing. I don't even know where to start. Do you remember the last thing I said to you? I asked. He stayed silent. I told you, if you want to understand the system, read the documentation. But you said documentation doesn't generate profit, and now you're seeing the cost of that kind of savings. Rachel, I get it, he said, his voice breaking. But we can renegotiate. Any fee you want. $500 an hour. I'll sign the contract right now. You say yes. I looked down at my hands, the same calloused fingers from years of typing. It's not that I can't help you, Ethan, I said softly. I just don't want to anymore. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. I heard him inhale sharply on the other end, then silence. I ended the call. That night, Alan texted again. Rachel, they've lost 3 months of payment data. Residents are gathering outside the headquarters. Videos are everywhere. They say Ethan's been called into an emergency board meeting. I turned on the TV. A live headline filled the screen. Aurora facing systemic collapse. Thousands of residents locked out or overcharged. The reporter stood outside Aurora's main building. Behind her, a crowd of angry people in coats and scarves. I watched it quietly, not satisfied, not vindicated, just tired. It felt like watching a crash I had warned everyone about, but no one believed. A while later, the doorbell rang. I went to open it. Standing on my porch, in the middle of the snow, was Ethan. He was unrecognizable, his coat wrinkled, glasses slipping down his nose, face pale and desperate. Rachel, he said, his breath fogging in the cold. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but we're out of time. The whole system's down. I need you. I crossed my arms, standing in the doorway. You need me? Or you need someone to clean up your mess. He swallowed hard. Both. I admit it. I was wrong. Whatever you want, I'll pay. Any amount. Just help me save this company. I looked at him, remembering the day I was fired. The same voice, the same office tone, only this time stripped of arrogance, filled with fear. I said quietly, "You can't buy back what you once called unnecessary." He opened his mouth to speak, but I closed the door. The wind outside swallowed the sound. I stood there, leaning against the door, listening to his footsteps fade into the snow. Inside me, there was no triumph, only a heavy stillness, the kind of peace that comes when you have nothing left to lose. That night, I sat at my desk, watching the headlines flashing across the screen about Aurora. The coffee beside me went cold. I knew this wouldn't be the last call. People who once dismissed the value of experience always come back for it, but only after everything has fallen apart. And somehow I knew the storm wasn't over yet. 3 days later, I returned to the Lynx office in a completely different state of mind. The Aurora storm was still raging out there. News outlets, social media, and thousands of furious residents surrounding the old headquarters. But here, inside this bright, warm room filled with whiteboards covered in sketches of our new system, it felt like I had crossed into another world, a world where I could start over and do it right. That morning, Eleanor arrived earlier than usual. She wore a gray coat, a cup of hot coffee in hand. "Aurora's on fire," she said without greeting. I nodded. "I figured," I replied. Ethan came to my house, begging. But I didn't go back. Eleanor smiled faintly, her eyes calm but approving. Good. Someone once fired for being too expensive shouldn't get cheaper just because they regret it now. She set the cup down on my desk and studied the diagrams I had drawn over the last 3 nights. "This new system of yours, it looks more complex than Pulse at Aurora, doesn't it?" "I don't call it complex," I said. "I call it complete. This time we're doing it right. Every line of code documented, every function explained. I don't want anyone guessing what I meant ever again." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. Nothing built to last can depend on only one person understanding it." The new Lynx engineering team was meeting in the next room. Among them was Mara, an old friend who had been laid off the same week I was. When I suggested her name to Eleanor, she simply said, "If you trust her, I trust her." Now, watching Mara lead the junior developers with quiet focus, I couldn't help but smile. "Rachel," Mara called through the glass, "we just finished the resident data analytics module. The system can now predict device failures before they happen." I walked over to check her screen. "Good, but make sure you document every process. This time, no knowledge should live inside a single head." Mara laughed. "I promise I won't turn into a lone legend like you." I chuckled. "Good. A strong system is one that many people understand, not one that leaves a single person to take the blame." The following days blurred together. We worked almost nonstop. Lynx was preparing to sign a major contract with Westbridge Properties, a management group overseeing more than 10,000 luxury apartments on the East Coast. They had once been Aurora's biggest client. Not anymore. Aurora had lost their trust after the disaster. Eleanor's eyes lit up as she told me, "Westbridge is looking for a new partner. If Lynx proves itself, they'll move their entire system to us. This could shift the balance of the whole industry." I understood what she meant, and a small part of me couldn't ignore the bitter irony. The company that fired me for being too costly was about to lose its largest deal to the very place I now worked. But I didn't feel joy. I felt right. That evening, when the office had emptied, I stayed behind, reviewing data streams on the monitor. From the window, the city lights glowed against the glass, creating two overlapping reflections: who I was now and who I had been at Aurora. They merged for a moment, one who once believed in loyalty and one who had learned to believe in her own worth. When I finally shut down my computer, my phone vibrated. A message from Alan. "Rachel, rumor is that Ethan's about to be removed by the board. Westbridge officially ended its contract with Aurora. He's been looking for you everywhere. Be careful." I read the message and turned off the screen. He still didn't understand. I wasn't the engineer holding the keys anymore. I was building something new, transparent, secure, and untethered from any single person. The next day, Eleanor called me into her office. She placed a proposal in front of me. Westbridge has reached out. They want to see a presentation of our new system. They know you're the one who built Pulse at Aurora. I looked at her, uncertain. They'll think this is revenge. Eleanor smiled. No, Rachel. This is natural justice. When someone destroys something good, someone else always comes along to rebuild it. Better. That night at home, I opened my laptop and watched the news. On screen was Ethan at a press conference, his face drawn, eyes restless. He was trying to explain himself. We're working with external experts to resolve the issue. Any claims about faulty system design are baseless. I muted the sound. I didn't need to hear it. I had been there. I knew what was real and what wasn't. As night fell, I sat on the porch, the moonlight rippling over the lake. Daniel stepped out, draped a coat over my shoulders. I saw your name on the news again, he said. I smiled softly. That's fine. The more they talk, the more they'll understand. Sometimes, truth just needs patience while the world learns it. Daniel looked at me for a moment. Would you help them if they called again? I shook my head. No. This time, I'm not fixing. I'm building. In the distance, the lights of Aurora still shone, but I knew chaos reigned inside. Here, in the quiet of Lynx, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom in doing things right. I whispered, almost to myself. They can blame, they can beg, but in the end, the systems that survive aren't the cheapest. They're the ones built with responsibility. What I didn't know then was that in a few weeks, Aurora would lose more than just clients. And once again, my name would surface in their boardroom, not as a former engineer, but as the representative of the future they had thrown away. One cold February morning, as I arrived at the Lynx office, Mara rushed in, her face pale. She carried a thick envelope and dropped it firmly onto my desk. You should see this, she said, her voice tense. I opened the envelope. Inside was a printed legal notice from Aurora Living Group, the title in bold, Notice of Lawsuit, Intellectual Property Violation and Unfair Competition. At the bottom was a familiar signature, Ethan Hale, Chief Technology Officer. I read through it line by line, my face tightening. They accused me of taking proprietary source code and technical secrets from Aurora to Lynx Innovations, and of using a structure similar to Pulse to develop a competing product. I looked up at Mara. Ethan's behind this? She nodded. He sent copies to the press himself. A few tech sites already ran the story, claiming Lynx stole Aurora's intellectual property. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. I had expected this, though not so soon. When people are drowning, they'll always try to pull someone else down with them. Eleanor entered moments later, a cup of coffee in one hand and a file in the other. I assume you've read Ethan's letter, she said calmly. Yes, I replied, and he's already twisting the story beyond recognition. It's fine, she said, setting the file on my desk. Lynx's legal team is ready. We can prove your system is entirely original. Every line of code is time-stamped, copyrighted, and belongs to Lynx. I stayed silent. I wasn't angry, just disappointed. Ethan never understood that what I carried wasn't source code, it was philosophy, something no law could own. 3 days later, we were called into a preliminary hearing. The meeting room was in downtown Chicago, cold and sealed tight. On Aurora's side, Ethan sat between two lawyers, looking tired but still trying to project control. Eleanor and I sat across from them. Mara sat behind us, silent. The moderator began. Aurora alleges that Lynx's new system, codenamed Nexus, copies over 60% of Pulse's architecture, Aurora's proprietary software. Ms. Moore, your response? I stood, opened my laptop, and connected it to the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the complete development history of Nexus from day one. Every section of code, every commit is documented with timestamps, employee IDs, and stored in Lynx's internal servers. Please take a look. I displayed a detailed timeline, sketches, notes, and verified copyright certificates. If Aurora believes this is a copy, then they must show where it overlaps. I'm ready to explain every part because I designed both systems. One of Aurora's lawyers cut in, which makes you the most qualified person to copy it perfectly. I smiled slightly. Not a copy, and evolution. I didn't take what was old. I took the lessons of what not to repeat. The room went quiet. Ethan looked at me, exhaustion and resentment flickering in his eyes. Rachel, I know you're talented, he said, but you used what? You learned at Aurora against us. That's betrayal. I met his gaze, steady and calm. No, Ethan. I brought my experience with me. Betrayal is forgetting who helped you build what you're now destroying. A low murmur spread across the room. After 3 hours of debate, the panel announced a temporary ruling. Aurora lacked sufficient evidence. The case was suspended for further review. Outside the room, Mara exhaled in relief. So we won? I shook my head. Not yet. They won't give up that easily. Eleanor stepped up beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. You're calmer than I expected. You said something that made the whole room stop. What did I say? I asked. Not a copy, an evolution, she repeated, smiling. That line deserves a place on the office wall. I smiled faintly, but deep down I wasn't at peace. Because I knew Ethan. He wouldn't accept defeat, and this time he wouldn't just use lawyers. He'd use anything. That night, I came home late. Chicago's air was sharp, cutting cold. Daniel was asleep. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and checked the system logs. There were strange access attempts over the past week. Someone trying to breach Nexus. I didn't need to guess who. I typed one line into the system journal. If they want a war, they'll have to face what they never understood. Accountability. A week later, Lynx's legal department sent an update. Aurora has withdrawn its lawsuit. Ethan Hale has been officially suspended. The company is considering a full restructuring. I read the message and smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet relief. Mara walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. So this time we really won, right? I shook my head. No one wins, Mara. When ego replaces purpose, everyone loses. I turned back to the screen where the latest headline flashed. Aurora loses 30% of its stock value. Board meets in emergency session to consider sale. I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window at the thick snow falling outside. In my heart, I knew. The story wasn't over yet. When a company starts to fall, it always comes back to the one person who knows how to rebuild. And this time, if they do call, I won't be the engineer they once fired. I'll be the one holding their future in my hands. 3 months after the lawsuit, the official news broke. Aurora Living Group had filed for bankruptcy protection. I read the headline on my screen and my hands trembled slightly. Not from surprise, I had known this was coming, but from the strange ache of watching something I once built with all my heart reduced to fragments. Eleanor walked into my office holding a thick folder. The Lynx board met last night, she said. We're buying Aurora. I looked up, startled. Buying it? That's right, she replied, her tone calm, almost matter of fact. Their technology assets still have value, but more importantly, this is our chance to integrate their buildings into the Lynx system. And you, Rachel, will lead the project. I stared at her. Eleanor, that's the company that fired me. The one who called me too expensive. That's exactly why you need to go back, she said, her eyes bright. Not for revenge, for closure. You're not the person they cast aside anymore. You're the only one who can rebuild it. I stayed silent for a long moment. In my mind, I saw that day again. The cold conference room, the cream envelope, Ethan's detached gaze. Finally, I said quietly, if I agree, I want full authority over the integration process. And one condition, which is everything must be documented, every single step. This time, there will not be one line of code that only one person understands. Eleanor smiled and nodded. That's exactly why I chose you. 2 weeks later, my engineering team and I arrived at Aurora's old headquarters. The sign that read Aurora Living Group was still there, though the lights were out. Court notices covered the front doors. As I stepped through the revolving entrance, the air smelled of dust and old machinery. Familiar, almost painfully so. A few former employees remained to assist with the handover. They looked at me with mixed expressions, shock, shame, maybe relief. Mara walked behind me and whispered, feels like walking through a haunted house. I gave a faint smile. Sometimes, to end a haunting, you have to walk straight through it. When I entered the old boardroom, the one where I had been fired, the memories flooded back like a wave. The clock on the wall was still ticking, but the minute hand was broken. I stood there for a while before realizing I wasn't alone. Ethan Hale. He stood near the table, clutching a folder tightly. Gone were the polished suit and steady posture. His shirt was wrinkled, his face hollow. "Rachel," he said hoarsely, "I figured sooner or later you'd come back." I looked at him calmly. "I didn't come back, Ethan. I came to clean up." He let out a dry laugh, half bitter, half defeated. "You won. You got everything. I lost it all." "I don't see this as winning," I said. "When a company has to collapse just to learn how to value its people, nobody wins." Ethan drew a deep breath, meeting my eyes. "Do you know what's kept me awake these past few months?" "I'm not sure I want to," I replied. "That you were right," he said quietly. "Your system wasn't outdated. It just needed to be understood. And I was never humble enough to understand it." In that moment, I no longer saw the man who had ended my career, but a person, broken, crushed under his own choices. I said softly, "We both learned that lesson the hard way." He nodded silently, then set the folder on the table. "Old data, backups, what's left of Pulse. You might need it." I took it from him. "Thank you." As I turned to leave, he said behind me, "Rachel, I'm sorry." I stopped at the doorway without turning back. I know, but apologies don't rewrite code. That afternoon, my team from Lynx began assessing the old system. The data was a tangled mess, layers upon layers of overlapping code, thousands of unresolved errors. Mara looked at the dashboard and sighed. "Feels like mining in a pile of rubble." I smiled. "Then we'll rebuild from the rubble. And this time we won't skip a single line." Day by day, we cleaned, documented, and standardized. Every morning, I reminded the team, none of us are heroes. We're just caretakers of knowledge for those who come next. A month later, Aurora's infrastructure was fully restored and merged into Link's new platform. The headquarters was renamed Link's Integrated Living Systems. I stood beside Eleanor at the relaunch ceremony, watching the new logo being mounted above the entrance. Eleanor leaned toward me and said quietly, "You've come full circle now." I shook my head. "No, Eleanor, this isn't a circle. It's a straight line, through the ruins, toward something better." Below us, former Aurora employees stood among the crowd. Some nodded, some lowered their eyes, but I saw no hatred there, only understanding. When the ceremony ended, Mara laughed. "Remember what you said the day you were fired?" "I said a lot that day." "Which one?" "They think they lost one engineer, but they just lost the soul of the company." "Well, that soul's back now, just in a different form." I smiled gently. "No, Mara, it never left. It was just waiting for people to remember how to honor it." That night, I got home late. Across the lake, the lights from the old headquarters shimmered over the water, brighter than they had in years. Daniel was waiting in the kitchen. "Do you feel satisfied?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, just at peace. Sometimes justice doesn't need to win big. It just needs to exist." I stood by the window, watching the snow fall, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle in. I finally understood. Revenge isn't proving who was right or wrong. It's rebuilding what others destroyed, and making it last longer than they ever did. And as I looked at the building that once bore the name Aurora, now reborn under ours, alive again under my team's hands, I knew that this time everything had been written the right way. A year after the merger, autumn arrived in Chicago. In the mornings, Lake Michigan was still as glass, reflecting a blue sky and trees along the shore turning shades of red and amber. I still came to the office every day, but life felt entirely different now. No more sleepless nights, no more fear of keeping an entire system from collapsing. Everything ran smoothly, transparently, as if the company itself had finally learned how to breathe. The sign on the old building now bore its new name, Link's Integrated Living Systems. Beneath it was the logo our team had designed, two interwoven strands, symbolizing technology and humanity as one. Every time I walked past it, I felt a quiet mix of peace and pride. Not because of status or title, but because I finally knew I had done what was right. That morning, Eleanor called me into the main conference room, sunlight streaming through the glass walls. scattering golden light across the floor. She smiled. The board just approved your proposal. Next quarter, Lynx will launch the Moore Academy, an internal training program for engineers and system architects. I froze for a moment. Even though I'd written the proposal myself, I hadn't expected approval this quickly. They actually agreed? Eleanor nodded. You've proven the value of shared knowledge. This academy will be the foundation of Lynx for the next decade. You'll have full authority, faculty, curriculum, methodology. The board wants it to carry your signature. I smiled softly. I don't want it to carry my signature. I want it to be a place where anyone can leave theirs. A place where knowledge doesn't die with the person who holds it. Eleanor's eyes shone, just as they had the first day I met her at that little coffee shop long ago. That's exactly why I trusted you from the beginning. We both laughed and began mapping the rollout. I wanted the academy built on one core principle: continuous knowledge transfer. Every team would train the next. Every project would keep a detailed log. Every system would be written as if, one day, someone else might have to take it over, without fear. When the meeting ended, I went back to my office overlooking the lake, the small room where I spent my quiet mornings reading reports. On my desk was an old photograph of Aurora's first engineering team, the people who'd once stayed up all night with me when the company was nothing but concrete and cables. Many of them now worked at Lynx. Some had become team leads. Mara was one of them, the friend who'd weathered every storm by my side. That afternoon, Mara came in with a lunchbox in hand. The academy got approved, didn't it? She asked. It did. We start next quarter. Mara sat down across from me, smiling as she unwrapped her sandwich. You'll never guess. Ethan emailed me yesterday. I looked up. Ethan? Yeah. He's working at a small software firm in Seattle now. He said he wanted to thank you for not seeking revenge. I was quiet for a moment. What else did he say? Mara scrolled through her phone. He wrote, Now I understand what expensive really means. It's not about salary, it's about the person who knows how to do things right. Thank you, Rachel, for teaching me that lesson, even the hard way. I sat still, watching the golden leaves drift down onto the water outside. For some reason, my chest felt lighter. He lost a lot to learn something simple, I said, but at least he learned. Later that afternoon, I visited the main hall, being renovated for the academy's opening. A temporary board hung in the middle of the room, chalked with the words, The Moore Academy. I wiped the board clean and wrote beneath it, Don't build things that make people need you. Build things that make people understand you. A few young engineers entered, read the line, and nodded quietly. I looked at them and saw in their eyes the same spark I had 18 years ago. The curiosity, the drive, and the belief that technology could make the world better. That night, as I walked home, I stopped by the lake. The city lights shimmered across the surface like scattered stars. Daniel called from behind me. You're still not tired? It's been a long year. I turned, smiling. I'm tired. But it's the kind of tired that means I'm headed in the right direction. We sat together on the old wooden bench. I looked over the water, remembering everything. The termination meeting, the long nights at Lynx, the calls, the silence. Now it all felt like a program that had finally finished running and returned its final result: peace. Daniel asked softly, Do you ever wonder if things would have been different if you hadn't been fired? I smiled, eyes still on the horizon. No, because if that day hadn't happened, I'd never have known what I was truly worth. The lake rippled gently, carrying the warm glow of the sunset. I whispered, more to myself than to him, Value is never a cost, it's the foundation. Eleanor once told me every good engineer carries two things: reason and memory. Reason to build. Memory to never repeat mistakes. She was right. The next morning, I wrote the first line of the Academy's teaching manual. Technology never betrays anyone. Only people betray their own diligence. When I signed my name, Rachel Moore, I smiled. I knew a new chapter had begun. Not mine, but for those who would continue the path ahead. Outside, Chicago lit up, buildings glowing over the calm lake. I gathered my papers, turned off the lights, and quietly closed my office door. In that peaceful dark, I realized something I had chased for years. I no longer needed anyone to prove I was right, because the results already had. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely free.